There. Did you see it? Most people don't. For months, the police didn't. Even the jury missed it the first time this footage was played. Okay, rewind. Watch the jacket. As he sits, the fabric pulls tight against something rigid hidden beneath. Right there. For a split second, a rectangular outline appears. You don't see the object itself, only the shape it forces the fabric to make. For half a second it's there, then it's gone. Not a phone, not a wallet, something else. Something that 3 hours later the court would see used in a fatal attack. Three men, masks, weapons, 10 seconds of chaos. Here's the problem. Which one is which? When every face is covered, identity becomes impossible to prove. And without identity, there's no case. Complex crimes always begin as puzzles. Cell data, phone records, forensics, pieces scattered across the investigation. This footage, just another piece. None of them enough on their own. But watch what happens when you start connecting them. That detail from the start, the jacket outline, that was the piece. Watch how it changed everything. The prosecution had to assign names to those shadows. Khan, Maya, Ali. Two of them were relatively straightforward. But one figure became a recurring problem, referred to in court simply as Man 3. Different clothing than earlier footage. A covered face, no clean identification at the critical moment.
This is always a difficult case. Just looking at the key bit of video, if the prosecution had correctly identified Zayn Ali as Man 3, we had a problem. Because although he doesn't have a knife in his hand, he's, I think, the first or second out of the car. He's running with the other two who definitely do have knives.
The defense strategy was direct. If you cannot be 100% certain that Man 3 is Zayn Ali, you cannot convict him of the intent to kill. But the prosecution had a theory.
The prosecution's case had to be that when he had gone home prior to the offence, he had changed his clothes, because Man 3, as he was in profile 3, was definitely wearing different clothing to Zayn Ali was wearing back in Sayers Caps.
They said he went home and changed his clothes. Once identity becomes arguable, intent becomes harder to pin down, because intent sits on top of identity. If you can't be sure who he is, you can't be sure what he intended. To bridge the gaps in the CCTV, the prosecution turned to the invisible net that surrounds us all, cell site analysis. Cell site analysis is simpler than it sounds. Your phone constantly connects to nearby towers. In dense London, those towers cover small areas, sometimes just a few hundred meters.
So telephones are the downfall of the modern street criminal. Your mobile phone, particularly if it's a smartphone, is constantly searching for the nearest cell, not only the nearest cell, simply the strongest signal. Where that nearest cell will be will, in terms of distance, will depend very much on the geography of where you are. So if you're in the middle of the city of London, it could be 50, 100 meters between cells. You get out to the country, it can be 15 kilometers. But talking here, East London, it's probably a matter of, a few hundred meters.
Every billable event, start and end of a call, is recorded. The data painted a picture: movement, coordination, timing. It couldn't pinpoint an exact address, but it put 6 phones in the same small circle at the same time, moving together. The jigsaw was coming together. But the biggest threat to these men wasn't the evidence. It was each other. When 6 phones connect to the same towers in the same sequence at the same times, that's not coincidence, that's a pattern. And patterns are hard to explain away. A single ping might be meaningless, but when you have multiple phones moving in sync, the coincidence becomes coordination. The prosecution built a stack. CCTV showed what happened. Cell data supported who was near. ANPR tracked vehicle movements. And then there were physical traces. Items that might look small on their own, but matter when they lock into the wider story. A purple vape was found under the taxi. DNA on it matched 2 defendants, 1 in a billion odds. That sounds conclusive. But here's the defense response.
But if one just theoretically has a vape by itself, so a movable, disposable, unimportant object that has DNA on it, that although it can be tracked back through criminal database to particular people, you can't say when they left their DNA, you couldn't say when they dropped that. It could be a complete coincidence that a movable, disposable object was near to this scene. Put it another way, if that's all they had found to connect those 2 defendants to this event, they never would have been charged.
A movable object proves nothing about timing unless it's part of a pattern. Remember that, because you'll see exactly how this piece locks in later. But first, the story was about to get complicated by the defendants themselves. In a multi-defendant trial, solidarity often has an expiration date. As the evidence mounted, the united front collapsed. This led to a legal scenario known as a cutthroat defense. It's when the person sitting next to you in the dock becomes as dangerous as the prosecutor standing opposite you.
Mr. Ali was saying that man 3 was Mr. Malik, and Mr. Malik was saying that man 3 was Mr. Ali. So as soon as you have defendants turning on one another, the prosecution's role was made, or job was made, a hell of a lot easier.
When defendants accuse each other, the jury is presented with a paradox. They might decide both men are liars, or they might lose certainty entirely. The defense strategy was to muddy the waters, to make the silhouette of man 3 interchangeable. And when certainty weakens on identity, certainty weakens on intent. This is where the case stood on a knife edge. Until we return to that shape in the jacket. Let me show you exactly what was spotted. Khan sits down. Right there, freeze. The jacket pulls tight across his right side. Something rigid. Something that doesn't bend as he moves. For 3 seconds, an outline, approximately 18 inches long, pointed end visible. Now watch what we see later that night. The prosecution's inference: he was armed before he ever got in the car. Let me tell you how this was discovered. CCTV review in major cases follows a protocol. Teams view multiple camera feeds, logging timestamps, flagging anything significant. But all of that gets fed to one officer, the CCTV specialist. And that officer reviews the critical footage dozens, possibly hundreds of times. But here's the thing about that process. Hour after hour, staring at grainy footage, the same angles, the same movements. Human attention has limits. You stop seeing what's there because you've looked at it too many times. That's not incompetence. That's why the system has redundancies. Trials can last weeks. Officers rotate through the courtroom gallery, different eyes, fresh perspective. One afternoon, while the CCTV officer was giving evidence, an officer in the back of the court saw something that had been missed through 300 hours of review.
When there was quite a flurry of activity from officers in the court who'd spotted something that he had missed that he really ought to have seen, which is the shape of something relatively large. You can't see exactly what it is, but it's bulky and needs to be adjusted as the lead defendant, Carl, sits in the cab office. And it certainly has the look, the size of the sort of knife that he was carrying later.
Fresh eyes caught what exhaustion had concealed, the system self-correcting, and what they saw changed everything. Why did this fleeting shape matter so much? Because if that outline is consistent with a concealed weapon, it supports intent before the car ever arrives at the scene. It suggests this wasn't spontaneous. It suggests they were equipped for violence hours in advance.
Well, we certainly see Khan come out of the Mitsubishi with a very large knife or sword in his hand. It's not possible to say that's necessarily the same item that's seen back in the cab office. But there's certainly an inference that he's carrying a knife, a large knife before, he's seen with a large knife later on at the incident. A jury could conclude it's the same knife, although I'm not sure one will be certain.
The discipline here is critical. We cannot say we see a weapon. We can only say we see an outline consistent with one. That distinction is the difference between a story and proof. But when combined with everything else, here's what the jury had to weigh. 6 phones switched off simultaneously before the attack, all switched back on afterward, all moving together. The Mitsubishi on ANPR traveling between defendants' homes, the vape with DNA from 2 of them found at the scene, the cloned plates requiring planning, and now the outline, suggesting weapons were carried hours before. Any one of these, explainable, all of them together, the defense ran out of coincidences. That's congruence, not perfection, overwhelming agreement.
What you have is a combination of CCTV and automatic number plate recognition hit and the cell site evidence from the phone, layering on top of each other, all saying something congruent and all pointing in the same direction, which helps you to track back and forwards from masks made of the scene to earlier and later events.
The prosecution did not win by producing one perfect fact. They won by making multiple imperfect facts agree. The CCTV was blurry, the vape was movable, the phones were circumstantial, but when stacked, they left no room for coincidence. But congruence doesn't guarantee conviction. For 2 days, the jury deliberated. 12 people had to agree, beyond reasonable doubt, on exactly who did what. The case that seemed solid, it was balanced on a knife edge. Six defendants, 4 convictions, 2 acquitted. The jury had to assign roles. They had to be certain of intent. For Khan and Meyer, both armed, both active, they were sure. Murder. For Zain Ali and Ibrahim Naim, defined roles, part of the plan, but they were not sure the prosecution had proved the intent required for murder. Manslaughter. And for Khalis Malik and Esahak Yusuf, the Crown's case was they were present, ready to assist if necessary, but without an overt act, the jury were not sure they had assisted or encouraged the plan. Acquittal. Doubt didn't vanish. It simply failed to survive the weight of the stack. This case looked like chaos, a burst of violence on a dark street. But inside the courtroom, it became proof work. Identity, intent, inference. My role is to test the state's case to find the gaps where reasonable doubt lives. And for a long time, those gaps were there. We had a blurred identity. We had a man 3 who could be argued either way. But then the jacket outline was spotted. Then the cutthroat defense began. Then the stack became overwhelming. This is when you see the real power of layered evidence, not perfect individually, overwhelming together. People ask whether this was random. The evidence presented suggested it was targeted. That doesn't lessen the seriousness, but it matters for understanding risk and for understanding why motive is often not proven in court.
Most killings are deliberately targeted. Most killings outside the domestic arena are criminal on criminal, gang on gang. And whilst I don't know the statistics, I would suspect that in the UK, your chances of being killed by someone you don't know are pretty slim.
Understanding these cases matters. Understanding how proof is built matters. If you take one thing from this case, take this. A trial can turn on a detail you can barely see. See you in the next one. A 26-year-old man traveling in the back of a taxi on a Saturday night. Anselm Senaj. He never made it home. No amount of congruence, no jury verdict, no prison sentence changes that.